Yá'át'ééh. Good morning, my relatives. Today is Friday, October 11th already. I'm back in DC. I have my second cup of coffee, and I have not had a conversation with you in a long time. So I'm excited to be back and to share a few things about what's been going on for me, but also to talk about some upcoming events and to talk about Billy Graham, Donald Trump, seed oils, and chicken skins. So anyway, before I begin, let me do like I always do and acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from what's now called Washington, D.C. My people call it Washington. It's the traditional lands of the Piscataway, and I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of these lands where I'm living. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands. And I just want to state how humbling it is to be moving, living, breathing, eating, walking, running, uh, enjoying the beauty of these lands. So, Ahiat, my Piscataway relatives, thank you for your stewardship of these lands. It's been a little while, so let me see if anyone is jumping on right away to say hi. Steve, Yá'át'ééh. Good morning. Great to see you. Susan, Yá'át'ééh, thank you for joining. Good to have you on with me this morning. I hope all of your cups of coffee are as good as mine. And I have to give you a little update on my coffee. We've actually made a few changes around our family and how we make our coffee. As you know, most of you, I am a diehard. I love my AeroPress, right? I do an inverse AeroPress every morning to make my coffee. I love my AeroPress. But as my wife and I have been discussing how to reduce the amount of microplastics we're exposed to, we thought maybe pouring boiling water into a plastic AeroPress might not be the best for our microplastic ingestion rate. So we have switched. We still have our AeroPress. We'll still use it occasionally, but we've switched to a pour over. We bought a metal pour over a couple of days ago. And this is going to sound almost blasphemous to many of those who know me well, but I actually like it better. I didn't think it would be possible to have a better cup of coffee than I was getting with my AeroPress. But just to try it, the first day, my wife bought it when I was gone, and so when I got back last week, I thought, well, let me try and see what it tastes like. And so I made a cup of excuse me, let me just make sure my ringer's off here. I made a cup of coffee in the AeroPress. I made a cup of coffee in the pour over, and I tasted them side by side, both nothing in it, no sugar, no cream, just black coffee, so I could get the most flavor of the coffee. And I actually like the pour over coffee better. So yeah, I didn't think it was possible, but I have actually upped my coffee game. And the pour over is very simple. It's just a metal pour over. Just put it on top of the cup, and it takes actually takes a little less longer to brew because you don't let it sit in the brewer as long. We would let it sit in the AeroPress for about 3 to 4 minutes, and it kind of starts filtering right away. So it takes about 2 or 3 minutes to make it. It's actually a little bit less time than it took maybe about a minute less than it took to make the AeroPress. But I actually really like the flavor of it. And so, yeah, I am enjoying a cup of pour over brewed Ethiopian locally roasted coffee beans this morning. And it's great to be back. I'm looking forward to the discussion we're going to have. Let me see who else just jumped on here. George, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for joining us this morning, George. It's great to have you on here. I know there's some other people watching, and many people will watch this a bit later. But it's very good to be back. Let me just update you on where I've been. So I haven't been doing my second cups of coffee very consistently for much of the month of September and beginning of October. And it's because I had to make an unexpected trip in the middle of September to spend some time with my parents. My mother had a surgery, and then she had a few heart problems and had to have a pacemaker put in. And so I flew out there to be with them after the pacemaker was put in, just so I could help my dad take care of her and help take care of my mom, and was able to spend some time with them. I then drove up to Denver and went to Denver Seminary, where I spoke on the topic of church and politics at a conference that they had. And I'm excited that they actually have that conference posted online. I'm going to share a link with you in the chat So let me put this in the chat right now. This is a link to the entire conference page. They have 4 plenary sessions and a panel discussion. I gave one of the plenary sessions, and there was also Tim Alberta and Dr. Mark, I forget his last name. Anyway, the president of Denver Seminary was also there, and a few other people. And so all of those are in the link I just posted. But if you want to see my presentation directly, this is the link to the Vimeo site from the same location of my presentation that I gave at Denver Seminary last month. And so I was there, and I spent some time at Denver Seminary. And then I drove back after that to back to New Mexico to spend a few more days with my parents. And then I flew home. I spent 2 days at home, and then I went to South Dakota for another film festival of the film I was in about a year and a half ago called Bad Indian, Hiding in Antelope Valley, and that was premiering at the Mount Rushmore Film Festival. And so I went there for that, and then I flew to Albuquerque. And in Albuquerque, I was able to speak at Good Medicine Way. And I'm going to put the link to that into the chat as well. At Good Medicine Way, I was able to speak on whatever I wanted to. This is run by Casey Church and a few of his partners, and so they have kind of a contextualized worship time. It's both in person as well as virtual, so they have a fairly good online audience as well. And I spoke about decolonizing health, and I talked about the wisdom of our Indigenous ancestors of what it means to live well within this country, especially in regards to our health. And so I spoke about that, and the whole service is online. It's about a 2 to 2.5 hour long service. I spoke for about an hour, and then we had about an hour and a half, or about half an hour of Q&A afterwards. And so the link I put into there is on their YouTube channel. It's the live stream of the service, and I bookmarked it to start right where I began speaking, right where I'm introduced. And so you can watch that there. But that was a really good chance just to lay out some of the thinking I've had on health all in one space, even more than I've done in a single second cup of coffee. So if you want to go there and watch that, you can also go there for that. I then went to Portland, and I spoke at the CCDA conference, and I spoke in the plenary session there, as well as I did a seminar. The plenary was on the theme of home, and the plenary, or the seminar, was on content from my upcoming book, Decolonizing Faith. I don't have recordings of either of those to share here, but I do believe CCDA is selling those. And so if you go to their website, you might be able to find them. But I don't have those here. But those sessions went very well. I had a really good discussion. So that was about most of probably 2/3 of the month of September, and about the first week of the month of October. I got back into DC last Friday and took the weekend off, and then began getting back into some work this week. I do have some upcoming events going on in October, and I'm going to share a few of them with you. One of them is actually happening next Monday. It's on Indigenous Peoples Day. And I am speaking at the Adrian Dominican Sisters. They're out of Michigan, but they are They invited me to be a part of their. It's a teach-in, an Indigenous Peoples Day teach-in, and they've asked me to talk about content from the book I wrote with Singchan Ra on Selling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery. And then they're going to follow that with kind of a panel discussion and a Q&A. Panel discussions with some local leaders. I think they're Native leaders who are joining. And then we'll have also a Q&A there in regards to my plenary. And that event, not only is it taking place locally, but it's going to be available online. They're live streaming it. It begins on Monday, October 14th, which is Indigenous Peoples Day, used to be known as Columbus Day. And they already have the link up, or the place where you can get the link. And so right now it will take you to a flyer that they have. But if you go to this page, you'll see the place where they will live stream it. And I'm just going to share the flyer they sent me right here. So this is Monday, October 14th. It begins at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I believe I'm speaking around 1:45, and they've given me an hour to speak, and then we have about a half hour to another hour for the Q&A and the panel after that. And so it's going to go till 3:30, maybe even up till 4. But I'm really looking forward to this session. I'm excited to be able to do something not only on Indigenous Peoples Day, but something that's being live streamed so people around the country can join as well. You don't even have to register. You can just go to the link that I just put into the chat, and I'll also share these in the show notes for the show. But yeah, you can join on Monday, October 14th. You can join the live stream, or you can watch it archived later. It will be on their website if you want to see that later. But yeah, I'm excited that is going to be taking place. And so that's kind of my upcoming schedule. But that's, let me see who else has joined us on here. Anyone else on here with us right now? Okay, looks like I haven't missed anyone. But yeah, so that's what's going on. I'm excited to be home. And I'm home I have an event almost every week in October, but many of them are virtual. And so the end of October, I'm actually traveling back to New Mexico, and I'm going to be joining a contextualized worship group there, not even to teach, just to talk with them and to kind of dialogue with some of my friends and partners there. And I'm going to look into possibly preaching at a church either in Albuquerque or in Gallup on that Sunday, which is like 3 Sundays from this weekend. But yeah, so I'll definitely keep you informed if anything comes together for that. But I am looking for hopefully to do 1 or 2 other events while I'm in New Mexico. And then I don't have a flyer about this yet, but on the weekend of Veterans Day, which I think Veterans Day is on Monday, November 10th. But that weekend, I'm going to be in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm going to be preaching at a church in Minneapolis and hopefully doing 1 or 2 other events in the city, but they're not completely nailed down yet. So follow me on social media and or join me on Patreon to get the latest information as I get the details about that. And then I'm beginning to plan a trip to Seattle, either later in November or possibly even early December. That's not nailed down yet, but I am hoping to do that. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff going on, and I'm going to be doing some more traveling these next few months. So I'm looking forward to all the dialogues we'll get to engage in this. But I have a lot of things I need to talk about regarding just what's going on in politics, what's going on in the church. I have not watched the vice presidential debate yet. I recorded it while I was gone. I just haven't had a chance to sit down and watch it. I do hope to do an episode of my second cup of coffee on that debate sometime in the next week or two. And I hope to have a few guests on both in October and maybe even into November as we have the election coming up, just to discuss what's going on in the race for the campaigns and the political races going on in the 2024 election cycle. So that's going to be coming up. I wanted to talk about an article came across my page my social media the other day that I actually it intrigued me. It was written in Christianity Today. And it was regarding a video put out by Evangelicals for Harris, where the article stated, and I'm sharing the article with you right here, that they took some clips of a sermon by Billy Graham, warning Christians to beware of people in coming days that would endorse greed and endorse violence and endorse all these other things. And they kind of flipped that back and forth between the preaching of Billy Graham and then quotes and video of Donald Trump embracing the values that Graham is warning Christians of. And it's a very interesting video. I'll share the link to the video. Let me find it here. It's on the website of Evangelicals for Harris. The video is called Keep Clear because that's the message from Billy Graham. And it's an effective video, right? It's what most people are pointing out, at least people on the left, of, yeah, Donald Trump is courting the vote of white evangelicals, but his life has no integrity with the supposed values of the Christian church or of the church in general. And so this ad highlights it. And the article in Christianity Today basically is about the fact that the Franklin Graham's organization has sent a cease and desist letter to Evangelicals for Harris, even threatening, I think, to sue them because of the use of the words of Franklin Graham or of Billy Graham prophesying against the corruption of Trump, essentially, is what it is. And I find that really striking. And I want to share it here because just this whole scenario of they're literally laying out the preachings and the teachings and the biblical understandings taught by Billy Graham, and then they're demonstrating how Donald Trump does not adhere to, actually embraces the opposite of almost all those things. And a Christian organization is threatening to sue and sending cease and desist letters saying, stop using Franklin Graham's father, Billy Graham, to basically speak prophetically about Donald Trump. And I just find that really, really striking. That, I mean, it's really kind of mind-boggling. And they say it's because Billy Graham actually it says Billy Graham would have liked Donald Trump and would have supported him because Donald Trump holds a lot of conservative values, and Billy Graham worked very hard to not get into the middle of the political fray with presidents, so he could advise presidents no matter what party they were in. But if you've heard me speak, and especially if you go back and watch my presentation I gave at Denver Seminary, one of the things I lament is that because of the way the church engages actively in partisan politics, what it's done is it's reduced the church to merely being activists or lobbyists. And that's all the church is doing now. It's when are not even activists, it's into being protesters and lobbyists. Right? When you're a protester, you focus on the negative, and these are all the bad things this person's doing, and let's just focus on that, and you overlook some of the good things they might be doing. And when you're a lobbyist, you're looking only at the good things that they're doing, or the things that you agree with, or the things that you advocate for, and you ignore the things that counter those arguments and don't hold up that image. And neither the lobbyist or the protester offer an accurate view of what's really going on. And the church is supposed to be about truth and about speaking truth to power and about being prophetic. And the whole point of my talk at Denver Seminary is when the church actively engages in partisan politics, then they merely become lobbyists or protesters. And that's really what the church is doing. And the article in Christianity Today and the ad by Evangelicals for Harris, right? They literally highlight that from, I would argue, both the left and the right. If the left thinks that their hands are clean, and when I was at Denver Seminary, I talk about the quote by Joe Biden, where he literally talks about the American military as being the army of the Lord, responding to a prophetic call on par with that of Isaiah the prophet, right? He talks about the Capitol as a sacred, a holy, a God-ordained place, right? I mean, all these, the left is very much just as deeply embedded with the idea of Christian nationalism as the right is, and overlooks the flaws or the misuses or the heresies of their candidates as they present them. And so I think this was just funny, where you have literally a lawsuit between two quote unquote Christian organizations where neither side is willing to be fully honest and accurate and truthful about the parties they're representing and the candidates they're advocating for. And it's turned into a lawsuit, right? They're not even listening to what's being said in the scriptures, where it says if someone's sinning that you go to them and talk to them, right? And then bring a. They're not even listening. They're just taking it right to the courts. And I think it just demonstrates the absolute hypocrisy of the way the church has allowed itself to be reduced to merely the role of lobbyist or protester. And it's actually terrified, afraid to speak truth to power and to actually be prophetic. Now, lobbyists will love to speak truth about their opponents, and protesters will love to speak truth about their opponents, but they won't speak that truth if they're parties in power, right? They won't point those things out then. So when you're in power, you're a lobbyist, and when you're out of power, you're a protester, and that's what the church has been reduced to. And it's happening on both sides. So I wanted to share those articles with you because I find it really fascinating that you have two Christian groups essentially going to court and asking a court of the country to determine who's right or wrong, and not even handling it as you would expect Christian brothers and sisters to handle these types of agreements, which is in-house. So anyway, I think it proved the point. I welcome you to go back and watch my presentation at Denver Seminary on church and politics. So that was one thing I wanted to share and talk about. And as always, I welcome your thoughts or your comments on these things. I do read the comments after the show's over, and I try to respond to things or include things that are very kind of eye-opening or helpful, or questions that are being asked. So yeah, I welcome you to engage with me on this issue. The next thing I wanted to talk about is a book that I've been reading, and I'm going to share the book title with you here. The book is called Deep Nutrition, and it's by Catherine Shanahan. And this book was actually written almost like a decade ago, maybe I think it might have been 2008. The book was written. I found it because I was looking at another book by Dr. Shanahan, specifically regarding vegetable oils. But I decided to read this book first because this was her first book out. And the book was actually kind of revised back, I think, in 2017 or 2018. So about 5 or 6 years ago, it was revised. And it now includes an entire section or chapter on vegetable oils and hydrogenated and other processed oils, seed oils that are being eaten. And I'm going to go back to some of the health stuff that I've been talking about, right? I just shared above with you the session I did at Good Medicine Way, where I talked for an hour about my journey to decolonize my health. And I talked about barefoot running. I talked about changes I made to my diet. I talked about ways I've worked on my sleep, and I'm working on my breath. And I think I've read a lot of books over the past year and a half. Actually, by the end of the year, my assistant and I were just talking the other day. We're going to list out my top books of the year, of books that I would highly recommend people to read, maybe like a top 10. So if you've been following my social media or following my Second Cup of Coffee, and you know I've talked about all these different books a lot, I'm putting together kind of a top 10 list of what are my favorite books that I've read that have been the most intriguing. As I've kind of thought through some of these things about decolonizing my health and changing my own health and diet practices. But one of the things that happens frequently, let me rephrase that. Of all the books I've read, some of the most overwhelming books have been books on ultra-processed foods. I've read several books on these topics and countless articles. One of the books was Ultra Processed People. Another book, there was a whole section in the Breath book about the impact of processed foods on our breathing. And now reading this other book called Deep Nutrition, that talks specifically about sugars and seed oils. And the challenge with all of these books is every book is like, we found the thing, we discovered the key. And if you just do this one thing, stop eating seed oils, or start eating whole foods, or start sleeping more, or stop breathing through your mouth. If you do this one thing, your life's going to be perfect. You'll be rich, you'll be beautiful, you'll have perfect health, you'll have longevity, right? And everything everyone is advocating for. We found the golden ticket that lets you have perfect health. And the truth is that that's not the case at all, right? You need to make changes at every level. You have to change how sedentary we are and become more active, and not just exercising, but we have to move more. We have to not just eat healthier foods. We have to actually eat foods that cause us to chew more, and whole foods. We have to sleep more, which means we have to focus our work more during the day, and we have to cut out our lights late at night, and we have to change our values of we'll sleep when we're dead, which is the mentality many people talk about. And right, we have to decolonize ourselves. And it's not one thing, it's everything. But the most overwhelming, I think, is when I read articles about processed foods. And what becomes quickly overwhelming about processed foods is that, and depending on what level you believe in all of the conspiracy theories that are laid out, but at some level there is some truth to this, where it's not just that corporations are feeding us bad food and selling us bad food, right? I lived on the reservation, and it's a food desert. And I was just back there a few weeks ago, and I remember one day I was trying to cook a healthy meal for my parents. While I was back there, we were in Shiprock, and I went to the local grocery store, and I couldn't find the same nutritional types of food that I would easily buy at grocery stores here in Washington, D.C. And I was in Shiprock. There's one grocery store, right? That's your option. Otherwise, it's a 45-minute drive or even further to get to another store. And so, so a lot of times we're living in these food deserts, which makes it hard to eat healthy. But that's not the only problem. It's that corporations, one of the books I read stated that what we need to remember is that food has evolved, or even been given, depending on your view of how things got into place, right, for the purpose of nutrition, of giving nutrition. And we've learned how to eat them in a way that benefits our health and helps us to grow, and all these different things. And processed food is made for one reason. It's not to make you healthy, and it's not to have a healthier society. It's to make money, right? That's the entire goal of corporations. The goal is to make money. And if you want to sell more food, you make it sweeter, you make it saltier, you make it softer, you make it, right? You process it in a way that it becomes unnaturally sweet, or unnaturally salty, or unnaturally crunchy, even somewhat addictive. That's how you sell more food. And so we have to remember that food has become something to get our money, and it's no longer about nutrition. And then the challenge, and this is what makes it overwhelming, is when you read some of these studies and you hear some of these stories by doctors as they try, both how little doctors are educated in health, in medical school, and then how the agencies, the FDA and other agencies charged with overseeing what's fed to people, look the other way and allow corporations to not give us healthy foods, and to not do the regulation that they're supposed to be doing. And right. and so it becomes this deeply institutionalized and systemic problem, because on one hand you have the food industry that is absolutely out to make a profit no matter what the cost. And then you have the government who's getting paid by lobbyists and is looking the other way when it comes to regulation and is not regulating the production of these foods so it is healthier. And right, and so this is where it quickly becomes an overwhelming problem. And again, I said every book tries to sell, here's the one thing, just do this one thing and everything will be fine. And that is never the solution. And so what I try to do from all of these books is like, okay, what's one or two things I can glean from these books that help me think about these things differently? And sometimes that what I'm gleaning from the book is not even the main point of the book, right? It's something else that the author mentions or that the author says or something they point out that because of my understanding of colonization and understanding of indigenous wisdom and indigenous practices, I'm like, oh yeah, this is something that's actually really valuable, right? So when I read the 5 a.m. Club and that talked about breaking a sweat in the morning, I was reminded, oh yeah, if I had listened to my elders when I started watching the sunrise 25 years ago, I should have been running at the same time, because the practice isn't just you watch the sunrise and greet it with your prayers. It's that you run to the east and greet the sunrise with your prayers. And so I actually, if I had listened to my elders, I should have been running 25 years ago instead of a year and a half or a year ago when I started. And so these are the things I'm kind of looking for. And one of the things, and I struggle to even say I would recommend the book Deep Nutrition, because there are some critiques of Catherine Shanahan's book, and she has some thoughts on health and beauty that are just out there. And I actually had to skip her whole section. She starts the book with a pretty long section on health and beauty, and I had to skip it because I just churned my stomach. I couldn't read it. So I struggle to even say I recommend these things. And I also need to tell you, I'm talking now about my own experience. I know I'm talking about things that are going to be contrary to what you'll be hearing in the medical position and medical fields. And so I'm telling you my story. I'm not trying to give you medical advice on this. I'm not trying to say, this is what we all have to do. I want to tell you my own story and my own thinking and some changes I'm beginning to make. But everyone, our bodies are different and the way we react to things are different. And we all need to think through these things on our own. But I just want to share some of my personal experiences. So I'm not giving medical advice here. But one of the things that was mentioned in this book, and she has 4 pillars of nutrition, and one of her pillars is not just eating whole foods like crunchy vegetables and raw vegetables and more fruits and things like that. But she also talks about eating the entire animal. And she talks about how, because we have demonized cholesterol and replaced that with fats, processed fat coming from seed oils, or processed oils coming from seeds. She actually references a lot of different studies, and I can't say I've looked at all the studies, but she does make a convincing argument of the detriment to seed oils to our health. And she says, right, so a lot of our health challenges have risen in the past few decades when we've stopped eating more of the whole of animals, and we've begun replacing more of those fats with seed oils. And now we're even eating just the leanest cuts of muscle from these animals. So we're not even eating healthy. If you're being healthy, you're not even eating the whole chicken, right? You're eating a boneless, skinless chicken breast, or a boneless, skinless chicken thigh, right? And you're cutting off the fat, and you're cutting off the skin, and you're only eating the healthy parts of the food. And she talked about hunter-gatherer societies, and yes, like all the other authors, she does mention the Hazda people. I think I don't get me going on that. But anyway, she talks about how a lot of cultures have a value for eating the entire animal, or as much of the animal as can be eaten. including eating the meat off the bone and eating the skin and the fat and even the liver and the gizzards and the parts. And it reminded me, right? Yeah, as Navajo people, we're taught, right? When you kill an animal, whether you've hunted a deer or you've butchered a sheep, you use the entire animal. You don't just roast mutton ribs and make some steaks from other parts of the right. You make a cheat, which is the fried intestines. You make the blood sausage, which uses other different parts of the body, right? You use the entire animal. And she says, yeah, so people, the point she makes in the book is we've been eating these fats and this cholesterol for hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of years, and it hasn't been causing an epidemic of heart problems and all the other things we're getting today. And so she says, maybe we look at, instead of what we've been eating for thousands of years, we look at what we've added to our diets recently. Well, we've added seed oils to our diets. And again, if you read her book, she makes a fairly convincing argument of the damage being caused by seed oils. And so, yeah, so what I'm taking from this book is this need to actually use things that have been around for a lot longer. Eating the more whole of the animal, including the fats, eating the parts that often just get discarded and aren't used anyway. Eating the skins off of chickens and all these other things. And I have to say this because it really reminded me of my father. And I called him last night, so I think he's watching. But it reminded me of my father because my father, right? My mother is American of Dutch heritage. My father's Navajo. My father grew up not traditionally, but he was much more in touch when he was a child of growing up with more of the traditions than I was. And so my father has a few habits that I did not learn from him. I did not embrace them, but they're things he does. So like when my mom fries hamburgers, for example, and she'll fry hamburgers in the pan. And we didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up. And so we didn't buy the 90-10, right? We bought the 80-20 or the more fatty hamburger. And so there was usually a good amount of fat in the bottom of the pan after it was done. And my father, I remember this growing up, and it still happens occasionally today. He'll get a piece of bread and he'll sop it in the bottom of the pan and he'll eat it. He'll eat the fat. Right? My mom tries to be healthy and she'll take the skin off of her chicken when she bakes chicken or when she cooks chicken, and she'll take it off. She'll cook it with the skin on, but then she'll take it off and not eat it. And my father will not only eat his chicken skins, but he'll also eat her chicken skins. and the intriguing thing is my father has, every time he goes to the doctor, his cholesterol is lower than my mother's. And again, I'm not saying, so start sopping your bread in the grease of hamburgers and start eating everyone else's chicken skin at the table. But I'm saying it reminded me of my father was raised much more in an environment where, yeah, you don't waste things, right? We need to eat, right? When you butcher a sheep, you don't cut off the fat. You actually eat the fat. You don't discard the organs. You actually make sausage out of them or some other things. You don't throw away the intestines. You wash them and clean them, and then you cook them into a cheat, and it becomes a delicacy, right? You use as much of the animal as you can to eat them. You don't just cut off the leanest portions of meat and only eat that. And when you eat the entirety of a sheep or the entirety of a deer or the entirety of a chicken, you're getting a lot more nutrients than when you just eat the boneless, skinless breast or the boneless, skinless thighs. And so that's one of the things that made a lot of sense for me that I'm kind of gleaning from this book. And the other thing I'm beginning to, I don't know if I'm making a rule about this, but I'm beginning to see a pattern, which is the more industry modifies, adopts, or adapts processes, and changes of food, I'm seeing a consistent pattern of that food generally becomes less healthy for you. And so, as a general rule, I'm beginning to look back on how my people, the Navajo people, how we ate and how we prepared things and how we cooked things and our attitudes towards different things we put into our bodies. And I'm comparing them with the modern idea of what we're supposed to eat and what we're supposed to do and what we're supposed to put into our bodies. And if there's a conflict, I'm tending to go more with what was taught and practiced and modeled in my Indigenous community. Because we were living for tens of thousands of years, maybe even longer, eating this way. Now, it wasn't just we were eating this way, right? I mean, you have to understand American culture is incredibly sedentary. So it wasn't just eating this way, it was moving a different way and being active in a different way. And so again, it's not just about changing diet, it's about changing movement and about being less sedentary and sleeping better at night, right? And doing all these different things. And so, yeah, I find it, and I know there's a massive debate, and the debate started decades ago about seed oils, and I'm kind of coming to the debate more recently. But as I'm exposing myself to more and more of these debates and these teachings, and again, as I quoted from Katie Bowman, science, nutrition, health and nutrition science is in its infancy. And if you read it, it changes daily. Like one day you can eat eggs, the next day you can't. One day canola oil is great for you, the next day it's not, right? It changed, and her response was, it's because we're using scientific data to teach us how to eat or how to be healthy, and that's not the purpose of science, she says. But when you live in an elder-free society, when you live among a people who are no longer indigenous to anywhere, or they've lost their connections to where they are indigenous to, and then they've ethnically cleansed and committed genocide against the indigenous peoples of the lands where they're now living, right? You have an elder-free society where there is no wisdom that's being passed down from people who have lived in these lands for generations, and therefore you don't know how to eat, you don't know how to breathe, you don't know how to move. And she said, so many of us are turning to science to get those answers. And that's not the role of science, she said. Not that it can't be helpful along the way, but that's not the purpose of science. And so, yeah, this is why I talk about this conversation in terms of decolonizing health. I'm not looking for the one thing I can change to be healthy. And anytime a white author referencing this scientific study and this double-blind study and this test and that thing and say, this is the one thing, if you just do that, right? This Catherine Shanahan doesn't talk about movement or exercise hardly at all. She's like, most everything is blamed on seed oils and sugar. And that's not true. Right? If we don't deal with the fact that we are absolutely one of the most sedentary cultures that's ever existed in the history of the world, yeah, we're not going to solve a lot of things. But also, we're eating more processed foods than people have ever eaten in their entire lives in the history of the globe. We have more things disrupting our sleep now than even 50 years ago, let alone 100, 200 years ago. And so if you're gonna wrestle with these things, you have to have a much more comprehensive and whole approach to these problems. And the more I read, and the more I realize how much I've been lied to by science, the more I'm beginning to both value and even trust the wisdom of my indigenous ancestors. And grateful that not only can I remember some of the wisdom that was taught to me, but I can still go back to our community and find that wisdom there. Again, this doesn't disregard the science. But if we base our decisions on science, we're going to be changing things depending on what article we read on what day. Whereas if we look at what our peoples have been doing, the indigenous peoples have been doing for hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of years, yeah, those are probably a bit more tested and true. So that's the perspective I want to bring to this. And I think one of the things I was most excited about, because I did this talk at Good Medicine Way, and I brought health and decolonizing health into both my plenary session as well as my seminar at CCDA. And some of the few times I began to talk about it when I spoke publicly in front of an audience. And the reaction and the response I got was almost overwhelming. In fact, after I mentioned it at CCDA, I did about 5 to 10 minutes of it in my plenary at CCDA. And I had many people coming up to me afterwards and saying, are you working on a third book? Or even, would you work on a third book called Decolonizing Health? Because the things you were talking about were of great importance and meaning to a lot of people. So I have to admit, I mean, I was thinking about this already. I'm already allowing the stuff I've been talking about and reading and learning. It's already going to impact what I'm writing in my book, Decolonizing Faith. It is impacting that. But it's getting to the point where I realize, yeah, I think I'm going to have to write a third book that I want to talk specifically about decolonizing health and this journey we have to make to have a much more holistic level of change. It's not we're going to find the one silver bullet, right? The one thing that's going to fix everything. It's we have to make a comprehensive list of changes. And most of these changes have come and are the fruit or the result of colonialism, or most of the detrimental things that are happening. So anyway, my relatives, those are my thoughts. Let me see who's on the chat, if anyone's jumping in with any thoughts or comments here. But so I'll show you that book one more time. The book, again, is called Deep Nutrition. Again, I'm not even going to say I recommend it. I'm still reading it, so I haven't finished it yet. There is the first section. I couldn't even read the whole thing because her thoughts on health and beauty, I was both put off by as well as even offended by, and so I definitely don't recommend that section of the book. But there are some things. There's a few things I think I am gleaning from this, and one of that is her thoughts and reflections on the harms of seed oils. And I think at least it's worth investigating more and trying to understand that whole bit better. Also want to remind you on Monday, October 14th at 1:30 p.m., I will be speaking virtually for Indigenous Peoples Day at the Adrian Dominican Sisters event, and the link has already been put into the chat. So those are some things coming up. Now let me go and look in the chat and see let me turn off this graphic here. Who's in here in the chat? Let's see. Margie asks, did your father go to a boarding school? My father was not a boarding school student. He attended Rehoboth Christian school, which operated as both a day school and a boarding school. And because my grandparents worked for the missionaries at Rehoboth, he attended Rehoboth as a day school student, not as a boarding school student. And so my father did not go to boarding school, but he was at Rehoboth at a time when it was operating partially as a boarding school. Let me see. Sharonda, hello. I joined late, but I missed the content about all the political craziness going on. Yeah, I'm actually hoping next week to talk more directly about the politics. I'm hoping over the weekend or early next week I can watch the vice presidential debate. And I definitely want to have some guests coming on in the next few weeks, this month and next month, to talk specifically about politics. But yeah, so I welcome you to stay tuned for that. But my relatives, I thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that your cup of coffee is as good as my second cup of coffee. And I want to remind you, and I want to share a few other things. Just a few other articles about deep nutrition. Again, just because there is a whole debate going on about this. So this is the Goodreads page about the book Deep Nutrition. Here is an article from the AHA specifically talking about the benefits of seed oils. And this is an article in another online uh, uh, media site called Vice, talking about some of the debate going on in seed oils. So I just share those with you. Again, this is something where I'm not giving you advice on what you do or need to or not need to do, but there's a whole discussion going on, and I'm trying to give you another lens in which you can engage in this discussion. I wanted to also let you know if you like what I'm doing with my podcast and the work I'm doing, where I'm trying to speak both as independently and as truthfully as possible, one of the best ways to support my work is through my Patreon site. It's a subscription site. I don't monetize my YouTube videos or my other social media, but I do use Patreon as a way for people who want to support my work and help keep my voice independent. And one of the things I do on my Patreon site is each month I do a Q&A. And on Sunday, October 20th, so not this Sunday, but the next Sunday at 8 p.m., I'll be having my October Q&A on my Patreon site. It's the Q&A tier. It's the Ask Questions tier, which is $10 a month. And you can join it for 1 month, ask your question, enjoy the content available to that tier, and then unsubscribe if you want to. But if you ever have a question about the work I'm doing, or I want to go deeper into some of the things I talk about, it's a great way for me to both engage more deeply as well as to allow people to support the work that I'm doing, so that I can continue to keep my voice as independent as possible. And then second, if you like the work I'm doing and you want to understand kind of the foundations for the work, I highly recommend reading my book, Unsettling Truth. You can buy signed copies of that on my website at wirelesshogan.com. And we also have what's called my book study special, where if you order 10 copies of my book from my website for your book study, I will give your book study a free 45-minute virtual Q&A at some point over the next year that you can schedule with me through my assistant. I'm also now recommending this to whether it's Sunday school classes or even classes in colleges or universities, where if I know our book is being used more frequently as textbooks in both law departments as well as in Christian universities. And so if you have a class that requires the reading of Unsettling Truths in one of your classes at your university or college, talk to your professor and let them know, hey, if we buy the books for the class from Mark Charles's website, we can get a free virtual Q&A with him during the class. And we can ask questions and talk about the book more in depth. So there's a lot of ways to do that. And second, if you're third, if you're kind of new to me and you want to find out more about all the work I'm doing, I invite you to look at my link tree. My link tree is a place where I have a lot of my links to my social media, as well as kind of more recent topics I've spoken on, as well as my podcasts and other things like that. And then third, if you ever just want to financially tip me, I know this happens sometimes. I haven't had it happen a lot to me, but if you don't even want to go through the hassle of subscribing to my Patreon, but you just want to drop me a financial tip saying thanks for the work you're doing, you can do that on my PayPal. And that's at Wireless Hogan on my PayPal. And so I just put the link in there. But anyway, my relatives, I hope you have a great day. I hope that your weekend is well. I look forward to the event I'm going to be doing on Monday for Indigenous Peoples Day. And I will definitely be back with another second cup of coffee next week, Tuesday. So my relatives, walk in beauty. And may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Yá'át'ééh and Hako'onet.